When people walk into my classroom, what they might see is desks, sometimes empty, sometimes full. But what I hope they would feel is what we all hope for, and that's to be in a place where we can fit in, where we can belong, and we can be ourselves. And that really happens first with a connection. So I thought it most important that I start by explaining my journey to get here to build that connection with each of you. I graduated from Clay Center Community High School in 2008 before earning my bachelor's in history from Bethel College in 2012 and earning my master's of teaching and learning from Friends University in 2016. I'm an employee of Newton Public Schools, and I've been employed there since 2013, and I'm currently the department chair. I'm an NEA board of director, and I've been involved with the National Education Association throughout my entire career, and I'm the 2023 Kansas Teacher of the Year. So that's me. That's Brian Skinner in a nutshell. Except that it's not. Because right now, you're possibly thinking, well, that's just a bunch of words. Or, how boring is he? And that's because as a society, we've gotten far too much into the habit of introducing, describing, and defining others by the lists of boxes that they can check, rather than the things and the stories that make up who they are. I start out most of my conversations and my talks with this question along the lines of, why do you do what you do? And that may seem cliche, but it's important because to understand your why gives you purpose. And I find that almost every iteration of the response that I get comes down to this single word: connections. Connections are what drive us, and they're what keep us somewhere. So instead, I'd like to reintroduce myself by sharing some of the stories and some of the best pieces of me. This first group of family friends have taught me that it's okay to take breaks and to just relax. And this group of childhood friends has been with me throughout my entire life, and they accept me even when my hair is like, this. This next group has taught me to lean in on what my strengths are and to do what I do best and to trust in that. And this last group that has allowed me just to be myself. And then my family, who is the core of who I am. We go on trips together, we spend holidays together, we call each other to talk about our days. I would be remiss if I introduced any part of my story of who I am and I did not include my family. And on one of those trips, I went with my brother to the Grand Canyon, and we had a near disaster as we decided that we would go from the top of the Grand Canyon to the bottom and back up in a day. Many people told us that's a terrible choice, you should not do this. But we did it anyway, we're competitive. And as we were hiking back up, we realized that this might have been a mistake and we might have made an error. It was a grueling hike, and at one point, I thought my brother might die. It is not that kind of a talk. He did not, and we leaned in on the connections that we had, and we helped each other out of the canyon. And everything was good. Until 13 years later, when I decided I would do this hike again. I thought that I could just do it the same, but I was 13 years older and in much worse shape. But I think that this hike was different because this time I did it alone. And as I was hiking back up, I realized how much I had relied on my brother that first time to help me out of that canyon. I realized how much I rely on the connections that I have with those closest to do the things that I do in life. But there were just enough pockets of cell phone reception as I was getting out of the canyon, and I was able to get messages from those who knew I was there and gave me encouragement to help me get out. And then as I became a teacher, in my second year, I realize that those connections that I have, I sometimes take for granted, and not realizing how not everyone has them so naturally there until I met this individual by the name of Midat Suleimani. Midat was one of those students who had high energy. He didn't always check society's boxes, and he found it much easier to act out in little ways in the classroom and be recognized that way than to be recognized for some other reason. And along those lines, one of those choices resulted in him being removed from the school system for 90 days. Right, wrong, or otherwise, the connection that he had with school, the connection he had with me was broken. But I thought when he returned, we could just pick up where we left off and we could just continue to build that connection. But we know better. After weeks and weeks of trying to continue that connection, I couldn't figure out why this wasn't working until several weeks later of persisting and listening, that he said something I'll always remember. He said, "I really thought you were going to treat me like some bad kid when I came back. I didn't think that anyone at the school actually cared about me until I saw that you did." And it was at that moment that I recognized the importance of persisting and continuing to listen to those that we work with, to hear their stories, and to recognize that although individuals may not check society's boxes, we all have boxes to check. And Midat is great with cars. He's naturally athletic. He has a wife and a son. He is my barber, and he is so proud to say every time I walk in there that I am Mr. Skinner's barber. You see, Midat doesn't deserve. Nobody deserves to be judged for their worst day. Nobody deserves to be judged for the things they're most insecure about. It's hard not to care about someone whose story and journey that you've heard. And you see, Midat's journey helps me think of stigma. It makes me think of what is it that can take something that someone is ashamed of and help it turn into a place where they feel like they belong, where they recognize the strengths that they have in a given space. And I realize that it's the stories and taking the time to show how much you care. You see, this graphic here is not one that is specific to education nor special education, but it absolutely applies. It's the idea that what we see of any individual is only a fraction of what makes up who they are. And sometimes the things below the surface can be heavy. Sometimes the things below the surface could cause us to be less successful on any given day. And as educators, we have the opportunity to recognize, listen, and accept that. So myself and my teammates over this past year or two asked some of our students, what is it sometimes that potentially causes you to be less successful? And here's what they said. And if some of these are hard to read, that's because they're also hard to live. Some of them are short-term, others longer lasting, but all of them have an impact. As a leader, I'm not always able to control the things for my students outside of my classroom, but I can control the space within my classroom. And I find that when I give people the space to be who they are, to share their stories, remarkable things can happen. We are not defined by the things we cannot do. It's the stories that make us who we are. Author Jordan Thoma wrote in his novel, I'm Just a Kid with an IEP, where he chronicled his journey through the public education system. And he wrote, we all have challenges. We aren't going to be good at everything. You just have to figure out what you're good at. You just have to figure out your gift. He went on to explain the importance of finding your strengths, like Midot found his strengths, and to lean in on those, to do the things that we do best. He said, I needed the person I am today to walk into that school when I was a kid. Now I will be that person for someone else. As educators, we all can be that person for someone else. And one of my seniors said in their last writing for me, in their paper, they said, the world tries to make us to feel like we have to be a certain way. But it's okay to just be yourself. We are all okay to just be ourselves. That is enough. The reality is that stigmas can come from anywhere. In most schools, it might be assumed that those on the Scholars Bowl team are the individuals with the highest GPAs, the ones that get the most accolades, and the ones who, quite frankly, would be successful with or without us. But that's not always the case at Newton High School. When I first became a Scholars Bowl coach over about 10 years ago, we were a team of 10. And over that time, we've grown to one of the largest teams in the state at nearly 40. And people tell me all the time I should consider making cuts to the program so it's more manageable. But I don't ever consider that because year after year, I have students that come to me and tell me, I heard that this was a place where I could be accepted and that I could fit in. And so I joined the team. And I found that they've leaned in on seeing where their strengths are. And through that and being able to move forward, they've been able to have some of the best successes that Newton High School has ever had as being state placers multiple years in a row. We all have the space to be able to allow people to feel like they belong. The connections that we build with our students are unbelievably important. But there's so much more than that. In my first year as a head coach of Scholars Bowl, we were driving to a varsity tournament in Salina Central. And as we get there, my student said, Skinner, you've been really quiet. What's going on? That's not like you. I said, you're right, and I apologized. I said, it's been a really, really bad day. And they said, it's okay. We're gonna win this for you. And I remember thinking, okay, thanks. But we went 10-0, and that was not only my first win as a head coach, that was the first varsity win that Newton had had in years. And the first thing that they did is they came to me and they gave me their medals and they said, we told you, Skinner, this is for you. Sometimes we need help remembering that connections are not a one-way street. Sometimes we need help remembering that we need those connections and supports just as much as our kids do. So I started out this talk by listing a set of professional boxes. I'm proud of those boxes, but I could have just as easily started out with a different set of boxes. I could have just as easily started out by saying that I'm not married, I don't have kids, I don't live a heteronormative lifestyle, and I struggle monstrously with balancing work and personal and constantly wondering if what I have done is enough. But I didn't start out with those boxes because I'm fortunate enough to have some professional ones to lean in on. I didn't start off with those unchecked boxes because people and educators like you have helped me recognize that I belong, have helped me realize that my story and who I represent is valid. As educators, it's the connections that matter. When we speak, when we interact, When we teach, we connect. And we give others the opportunity to let their story be heard. We give them the chance to unlock their strengths and see their real potential. I started out by saying, why do you do what you do? And for me, I do what I do because I want to make sure that those that I am around see that they matter. See that their stories are valid, they are heard, and that their strengths can help them get the success that they deserve. When we work together, we give this world the opportunity to be its best self and for everybody to recognize that their success is not dependent upon whether or not they can check society's boxes. Thank you.